The sun had barely risen over northern Rafah on June 24, 2025, but a crowd had already formed, driven by the desperate hope of securing a parcel of food. Among them were 4 individuals whose names would soon be added to a tragically long list. They were not combatants. They were simply hungry people, waiting for aid that might sustain their families for another day. Suddenly, the air was split by the crack of gunfire. Israeli forces positioned nearby opened fire on the assembled crowd. In the ensuing chaos, those 4 lives were extinguished, their wait for sustenance ending in a violent, senseless death. They were part of a larger, horrific toll from that single day, where at least 27 aid seekers were killed by military fire across Rafah. This incident was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a disturbing and deadly pattern. Since the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a US-backed entity, began managing aid distribution in late May 2025, these distribution points have become terrifyingly frequent sites of bloodshed. The hope for relief has been systematically transformed into a gamble with death. Eyewitnesses describe scenes of utter chaos, where Israeli tanks and drones fire directly into crowds of unarmed civilians without any discernible warning. The very places meant to offer a lifeline have been turned into what one Israeli soldier, in a shocking admission, described to Haaretz newspaper as a killing field. The scale of the violence is staggering and speaks to a systematic approach rather than random, unfortunate events. In just over a month since this new aid system was implemented, more than 540 people have been killed while trying to get food, and over 1,000 more have been wounded. These are not combat casualties, but civilians whose only crime was their hunger. The consistency of these attacks has led many to believe they are a deliberate tactic. A recent report from Haaretz confirmed these fears, quoting Israeli soldiers who admitted they had received direct orders to fire upon unarmed crowds of aid seekers as a method of dispersal, a brutal form of crowd control. The accounts from those who have survived these attacks paint a grim and consistent picture of the horror. People describe waiting for hours, often from before dawn, only for the arrival of aid trucks to be followed almost immediately by gunfire from Israeli positions. They speak of the panic, the screams, and the sight of people falling around them, struck down while clutching nothing more than an empty bag. The incident on June 1, 2025, at an aid hub in southern Gaza, serves as a stark example. The Gaza Health Ministry reported that the 31 people killed that day each had a single, precise gunshot wound to the head or chest, suggesting targeted killing rather than random stray fire. The epicenter of this recurring tragedy is a new aid distribution model managed by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. This US-based organization, which uses private American military and logistics firms, stepped in to oversee aid deliveries in late May 2025. The change came after Israel's severe blockade on the Strip prompted dire warnings of widespread famine. The GHF's involvement was presented as a solution to a humanitarian crisis, a way to streamline the flow of essential supplies into a desperate land. The United States government showed its firm support for this new system by committing $30 million to the foundation in June 2025, its first known direct funding of the group. However, instead of bringing order and relief, the GHF's management has coincided with an escalation of deadly violence at the very points it controls. The system appears fundamentally flawed, placing vulnerable, starving people in direct proximity to heavily armed Israeli military units. The GHF, for its part, has denied reports of chaos or gunfire at its sites, a claim that stands in stark contrast to the daily casualty reports from local hospitals and the harrowing testimony of countless witnesses on the ground. This disconnect between the Foundation's official statements and the reality faced by Gazans has only deepened the mistrust and fear surrounding the aid process. The Israeli military has also repeatedly deflected responsibility for the killings. When questioned about specific incidents, such as the deaths on June 24, its official response is often that it is reviewing the reports. In relation to earlier events, the military has claimed its forces did not fire on civilians. Instead, it has asserted that soldiers only fired warning shots at individuals deemed to be suspects who posed a threat by approaching troops or militarized zones. This justification, however, fails to explain the sheer number of dead and wounded, or the eyewitness accounts of indiscriminate fire on dense crowds kept at a distance. The tactics employed have created a deadly environment where the act of seeking food is fraught with peril. The presence of Israeli troops, tanks, and drones overlooking the distribution sites establishes a clear power imbalance. Civilians are forced to gather in open, exposed areas, making them easy targets. The military's claim of firing only at suspects becomes a dangerously vague justification in a context where any person in a crowd could be arbitrarily designated as a threat. This creates a climate of impunity, where soldiers feel empowered to use lethal force against unarmed people with little to no accountability for their actions. The international community has watched the spiraling death toll at Gaza's aid sites with growing alarm and condemnation. The United Nations has been particularly outspoken, refusing to cooperate with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's distribution model. A UN official bluntly described the system as a death trap, an abomination that dangerously weaponizes humanitarian assistance. The UN's position is that the GHF-led process prioritizes Israeli military objectives over the safe and impartial delivery of aid, effectively luring desperate people into harm's way. This strong stance from the world's leading humanitarian body underscores the profound failures of the current system. This criticism is not limited to the UN. A coalition of 14 international legal and human rights organizations, including the prestigious International Commission of Jurists, has publicly condemned the GHF model. In a joint statement, they issued a stark warning that any states or individuals enabling this system risk being prosecuted for complicity in war crimes. They argue that knowingly supporting a framework that consistently results in the killing of civilians who are protected under international law constitutes a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions. This legal pressure adds another layer of scrutiny to the actions of Israel, the US, and the GHF itself. In response to the mounting evidence and international outcry, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for a full and independent investigation into the killings. He has stressed the urgent need for accountability and for an end to the violence against civilians seeking life-saving assistance. The call for an independent probe is crucial, as investigations conducted by the Israeli military into its own actions have historically failed to deliver justice or transparency. An external, impartial inquiry is seen by many as the only way to establish the full truth of what is happening at these aid distribution sites, and to hold those responsible to account. Despite the global condemnation and the undeniable evidence from the ground, both the Israeli military and the GHF have maintained their positions. Israel continues to frame the violence as necessary security operations, while the GHF denies the very existence of the chaos reported by everyone else. This wall of denial creates an accountability vacuum, allowing the deadly pattern to continue without consequence. The refusal to acknowledge the reality of the situation effectively dismisses the lives of the hundreds of Palestinians killed and communicates a chilling indifference to the suffering of a population on the brink of starvation. The relentless killings at aid distribution points are a brutal chapter in a much wider and longer conflict. Since the Hamas-led attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, which killed approximately 1,200 people and saw 251 taken hostage, Israel's retaliatory military campaign in Gaza has wrought devastation on an almost unimaginable scale. As of late June 2025, the offensive has killed more than 56,000 Palestinians, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. In addition, more than 131,848 people have been injured, many with life-altering wounds. The vast majority of these casualties are women and children, a testament to the indiscriminate nature of the bombardment and ground operations. This staggering loss of life provides the grim backdrop against which the aid tragedies unfold. The population of Gaza is not only grieving the loss of tens of thousands of loved ones, but is also facing a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Homes, hospitals, schools, and essential infrastructure have been systematically destroyed, leaving most of the population displaced and destitute. In this context, the delivery of humanitarian aid is not just a necessity. It is the only thread keeping countless families from succumbing to starvation and disease. The violence at aid sites is therefore an attack on the last remaining lifeline for a deeply traumatized and vulnerable population. The importance of safe and unimpeded aid delivery cannot be overstated. For a family in Gaza today, a bag of flour or a box of canned goods represents survival. It means being able to quiet the cries of a hungry child. It means having the strength to face another day of uncertainty and fear. When the process of obtaining that aid becomes a life-or-death lottery, the fabric of hope is shredded. Families are forced to make an impossible choice: risk being shot to get food or stay in their shelters and watch their children weaken from hunger. This is a choice no person should ever have to make. Ultimately, ensuring the safe passage and fair distribution of humanitarian aid is a fundamental obligation under international law and a basic measure of humanity. The current system, which has proven to be a death trap, must be dismantled and replaced with one that prioritizes the protection of civilian lives. The international community must move beyond condemnation and take decisive action to enforce a system that allows aid to reach those in need without the threat of gunfire. For the families of Gaza, who have already endured so much loss, a safe and reliable supply of aid is the most critical foundation for survival and any hope for a future.